today might be a good day to take a day off. So could a 4-day work week be the golden ticket to higher productivity in the workplace? Our next guests say that there is some strong data suggesting so. Here to talk about that are the co-authors of Do More in 4, Joe O'Connor and Jared Lindzon. Joe, Jared, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
So a 4-day work week, we'll start, Joe, with you. A 4-day work week you think can work. Why?
Well, I think the 5-day, 9-to-5 work model that we've all become accustomed to, it was invented for an industrial era economy that no longer exists. This was back in a time when we had less than 20% of women in the workforce. It was back when work was really confined to a physical location and fixed hours of work. And we know that for most occupations, that is no longer the case. And so as we enter into this new age of AI, where the relationship between an hour of work and outcomes is going to be even more frayed, I think we need to reconsider whether this work model really works for the modern economy. And we also have a reality here in Canada where we are the economy that are the least excited about AI adoption. Only 9% of Canadians, according to Pew Global Research, say they're more excited than concerned about AI adoption. And so what we argue in the book is that the 4-day work week can be a very powerful incentive to get employees on board with new productivity initiatives and adopting new technologies.
Now, did we not kind of see a 4-day work week when it came to the pandemic and then working from home? Was that not a kind of test case that people could work on their own and work more efficiently? And we now see everybody coming back to work, Jared?
Well, I think there is some parallels there with hybrid work. We talk a lot about how before the pandemic, a lot of companies could work remotely and be effective. Employees could be effective working remotely, but they just weren't bold enough to try it. And then the pandemic forced us to try it. And that kind of gave us permission to say, well, what else might be beneficial to organizations, to employees that we're overlooking just because of the inertia, because we've done things a certain way for so long. So I think more than anything, the pandemic just gave us permission to question whether these longstanding norms are really suited for today's reality. And as Joe mentioned, the reality is that the 5-day work week was created for an industrial economy that no longer exists. Hours are growing because we are no longer sort of limited in our work to a physical location. We're working around the clock. We still measure people's output in hours, which is a really outdated way to measure productivity in a knowledge economy. And so there's a lot of reasons and a lot of data that we share in the book that shows that you can actually reduce hours by really focusing on everyone's attention on the things that really matter, on driving business outcomes, rather than letting those hours pass in work that doesn't really matter.
So, Joe, are you suggesting in the book that people on a 4-day work week will actually be more productive than they would have under the old model by working more hours, or just using productivity tools like AI, or what's the productivity bridge from the 5-day to the 4-day? How does that?
So we argue that in the current model, the incentive structure is broken. And what I mean by that is often for high performers, if you find new and efficient ways to do your job, new innovations to become more efficient, often the only reward that you get is for more work and more tasks to be loaded onto your plate. Meanwhile, if you take longer to complete your tasks, you work through your lunch break, you work into evenings, you work into weekends, often you're lauded as being more promotable, more committed, more dedicated to the job. And so the 4-day work week is a strategic tool to actually realign the incentive structure, to have employees pushing in the same direction as the organization, trying to achieve the same goals. And if you think about the impact that AI is going to have on work, the efficiency parts of productivity, so task speed, task volume, process speed, process volume, increasingly these types of tasks are going to be outsourced to AI. What's that going to mean? It's going to mean that the things that are important for human performance are being effective, creative ideas, making good decisions, making good judgments, critical thinking. Those things are not maximized by maximizing the number of hours people spend on the clock. They're about managing people's energy, their focus, their well-being, and their motivation. And the 4-day work week can be a really effective strategic tool to maximize all of those factors.
Now, how do you do it with industries that are 5 days? Stock market, for example, it's almost 24 hours a day. How do you balance it with that and industries that work on weekends and things like that?
Yeah, so we actually have an entire chapter of the book called "But What About My Clients?" And it looks at different unique solutions that organizations have taken in order to answer that very question. And we see a whole lot of different creative ways of doing it. We profile one company that actually does the 4-day work week by doing half-day Fridays, half-day Mondays, because they realize nothing important really happens before noon on Monday or afternoon on Friday. We've profiled other organizations that assign individuals to be on call one at a time. So, every quarter, you're that one person who is waiting by the phone, and if anything happens, you have to be available and ready to answer a customer need. We have found a lot of creative solutions to fill that gap, and often what we find is that the challenge, it looms larger in the mind than it proves to be in reality. We already are accustomed to doing a little bit of work here and there on a Saturday or a Sunday if we need to on the evenings. A lot of the times when the question is, how are you going to handle things that come up on that fifth day? The answer is, how do you handle things today when it comes up on a Saturday or a Sunday?
And does this carry over to manufacturing and industries like that, where you have to be there and you have to build things? You can't rely on AI or as much on AI?
There's no question. This is more complex in those types of industries where there is a more direct connection between a unit hour of labor and productive output. But I've worked with many manufacturers over the years, and one of the things that we found is that connection isn't quite the same as it was when most people were working on assembly lines. As a result of technology, actually, machine operators, a lot of their productivity isn't just about running the machine, but it's about collaborative problem solving. It's about, are they running multiple machines during that productive hour of labor? So actually incentivizing people to do better work, to do more efficient work, translates across multiple contexts. Actually, in many modern manufacturing environments, because paid overtime is relied on by so many people as part of their core salary, again, you have people almost leaving work to be picked up at the weekend. So we've seen how this can actually prove very effective across a multiplicity of different contexts.
And Jared, in a white-collar environment, do you take a view in the book on whether those 4 days should be in office, work from home, or does that sort of relate at all to the productivity and what you're talking about in a 4-day work week?
Not as directly as you might think. The two issues are somewhat related, but not super direct. So we see a lot of organizations that are struggling to get their employees back into the office can use the 4-day work week as a strategic tool to encourage that sort of enthusiastic return to office rather than, really taking a hit to morale. A lot of the things that people like to do at home, little errands throughout the day, maybe sleep in because you don't have to commute, spend less time and money on, lunches. All of those things you kind of get back in a 4-day work week. So it is a solution for organizations that are struggling to switch back into the office. However, we also find that organizations that are already really well set up to operate on a remote basis tend to already be a step ahead in terms of making the transition to a 4-day work week. A lot of the stuff about productivity and efficiency and finding that extra time in the workday, it's easier when your organization's already operating in a very digital way where things are measured and recorded, and it just sets it up a little bit better.
Okay, we're out of time, but I got one last quick question. Do you work a 4-day work week?
I do.
And you like it? And do you find it works?
I definitely find it works. And I just want to make one final point. You've been talking about Trump, tariffs, the situation south of the border. Most of the analysis would suggest the reason we've ended up in that position is because people felt left behind by the last great advances in globalization and digitalization. So as we enter this age of AI, we need to be thinking about how can we share the benefits of these time savings, of these productivity gains with the workforce. And I think a 4-day work week is absolutely the right place to start.
Okay. Jared, you work a 4-day week?
I work 32 hours, but across 5 days.
Okay. Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both for joining us today. You want to show the book quickly?
Yeah, absolutely.
There
Here
it
it
is.
is.
Do More in 4. The co-authors are here with us right now, Joe O'Connor and Jared Lindzon. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Maybe it'll come in. Fingers crossed. All right.